And as I listened to you open up this meeting, I thought to myself, I don't disagree with anything that you said at the beginning of the meeting in terms of the premise for why we're here. The American families are struggling with health care. We all know it. The American people want us to address this in a responsible way. And so I really do say thanks for having us all here. I think our job, on behalf of our constituents and on behalf of the American people, is to listen. And I spend time in my district. I spend time a lot of places. I've heard an awful lot. And I can tell you the thing that I've heard more than anything over the last 6 or 7 months is that the American people want us to scrap this bill. They've said it loud. They've said it clear. And let me help understand why. First thing is we've heard from the two budget directors about our fiscal condition. We have Medicare that's going broke. We have Social Security that's going broke. We have Medicaid that is bankrupting not only the federal government but all the states. And yet here we are having a conversation about creating a new entitlement program that will bankrupt our country. And it will bankrupt our country. It's not that we can't do health insurance reform to help bring down costs, to help save the system. This bill, this 2,700-page bill, will bankrupt our country. And secondly, Mr. President, I'd point out that I think this right here is a dangerous experiment. We may have problems in our health care system, but we do have the best health care system in the world, by far. And having a government takeover of health care, and I believe that's what this is a dangerous experiment with the best health care system in the world that I don't think we should do. So why did I bring this bill today? I'll tell you why I brought it. We have $500 billion in new taxes here over the next 10 years. At a time when our economy is struggling, the last thing we need to do is to be raising taxes on the American people. Secondly, we've got $500 billion worth of Medicare cuts here. I agree with Kent Conrad. We need to deal with the problem of Medicare. But if we're going to deal with the problem with Medicare and find savings in Medicare, why don't we use it to extend the life of the Medicare program, as opposed to spending that $500 billion creating a new entitlement program? But it's not just, Mr. President, the taxes or the Medicare cuts. You've got the individual mandate in here, which I think is unwise, and I too believe is unconstitutional. You've got an employer mandate in here that says that employers, you've got to provide health insurance to the American people, or you're going to pay this tax. It's going to drive up the cost of employment at a time when we have over 10% or near 10% unemployment in America. And beyond that, a lot of employers are going to look at this and say, well, I'll pay the tax, and they're going to dump their employees into the so-called exchange. Because that in 5 years, every American is going to have to go to the exchange to get their health care. And who's going to design every health care bill offered in the exchange? Under this bill, the federal government's going to design every single health care bill in America within 5 years, once this bill were to pass. I could go on and on and on. Let me just make one other point. I'll save you. For 30 years, we've had a federal law that says that we're not going to have taxpayer funding of abortions. We've had this debate in the House. It was a very serious debate. But in the House spoke. And the House upheld the language we've had in law for 30 years, that there will be no taxpayer funding of abortions. This bill that we have before us, and there was no reference to that issue in your outline, Mr. President, begins for the first time in 30 years, allows for the taxpayer funding of abortions. So, Mr. President, what we've been saying for a long time is let's scrap the bill. Let's start with a clean sheet of paper on those things that we can agree on. Let's take a step-by-step approach that'll bring down the cost of health insurance in America, because if we bring down the cost of health insurance, we can expand access. Mr. President, I told you the day after, maybe it was the day you were sworn in as president, that I would never say anything outside of the room that I wouldn't say inside the room. I've been patient. I've listened to the debate that's gone on here. But why can't we agree on those insurance reforms that we've talked about? Why can't we come to an agreement on purchasing across state lines? Why can't we do something about the biggest cost driver, which is medical malpractice and the defensive medicine that doctors practice? Let's start with a clean sheet of paper, and we can actually get somewhere, and we can get it into law here in the next several months.
John, you know, the challenge I have here, and this has happened periodically, is every so often we have a pretty good conversation trying to get on some specifics, and then we go back to, you know, the standard talking points that Democrats and Republicans have had for the last year. And that doesn't drive us to an agreement on issues. There's so many things that you just said that people on this side would profoundly disagree with. And I would have to say, you know, based on my analysis, just aren't true, that I think the conversation would start bogging down pretty quick. Now, we were trying to focus on the deficit issue. And the fact of the matter is, as we indicated before, that according to the Congressional Budget Office, this would reduce the deficit. Paul has different ideas about it. Other folks may think that there are better ways of doing it. But right now what we're doing is focusing on the issue of federal entitlements and whether we can make some changes. I will come back to you, I think, at the end of this session to answer a range of the questions that you just asked. Right now, what I want to do is go to Jim Cooper, who I think everybody knows cares pretty deeply about the federal budget. He's been championing this for a very long time. Jim, do you want to address some of the issues that have been raised in terms of both Medicare and Medicaid?
Thank you, Mr. President. We're all here. We're dressed up. We're on good behavior. But I think folks back home are wondering how we behave when the camera's off. The deficit, in my opinion, is probably the most important single issue we face. Paul Ryan said it well. Health inflation is driving us off a cliff. And I'm kind of intrigued by the conversation because so far we've heard a lot of folks trying to outdo each other in deficit reduction. I welcome that competition, especially if it's backed up with votes. Because it's easy to talk tough on this. It's harder to deliver. I personally like Senator McCain's suggestion. Let's get rid of all the special deals. That's just a starting point. Paul Ryan is right again, and Tom Coburn is right when they point out that we're probably wasting a third of medical spending. Medicare alone is $37 trillion in the hole. And that means for all the folks who want to talk tough and not vote tough, that's not good enough. It means that for all the folks who want to do this next year or next decade or leave it to their successor, that's not good enough. We've had some examples of how we've behaved recently. A wonderful bipartisan measure, the Conrad-Gregg bill, completely bipartisan for years, and a bipartisan fiscal responsibility commission was brought up for vote in the Senate. We had the 60 votes, but only 53 people showed up for work. 7 people who'd been original co-sponsors of that measure suddenly got different ideas when the moment of truth came. So, Mr. President, I'm thankful you have appointed a presidential fiscal responsibility commission with Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles to try to force us as a Congress and force the nation to address these fundamental problems. Because if you love Medicare, you need to act to save it fast. Every day matters. A report will come out issued by the Treasury Department. It's come out every year. It'll come out in the next few days. It's the only report that uses real accounting to describe America's fiscal problems, and the news is not pretty. It will reaffirm what's been discussed here about Medicare and Medicaid and other vital American programs being deeply in the hole. And the opportunity of cost for delay is extraordinary. So we can face these problems, Mr. President. We can solve them with political will. But the talking points won't do it. We've got to acknowledge the real questions. And as every business person in America knows, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And too many